The rain hammered against the windows of Rosie's diner like 1,000 tiny fists demanding entry. Sarah Martinez wiped down the counter for the 100th time that evening, her feet aching in worn sneakers that had seen better days. It was 9:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, and the diner was empty except for her and the ghost of better times. That's when the door chimed. A man stumbled in, drenched to the bone, his expensive suit clinging to his frame like a second skin. But it wasn't the Armani that caught Sarah's attention, it was his eyes. Hollow. Desperate. Lost. He collapsed into the nearest booth, shivering violently, water pooling beneath him on the cracked vinyl seat. Sarah grabbed a towel without thinking and approached him. "Sir, are you okay?" He looked up at her, and for a moment, she saw something that transcended wealth or poverty, pure human vulnerability. I don't have my wallet," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "I was mugged. I just need to get warm." Sarah glanced at the clock. Her shift ended in 13 minutes. She had exactly $23.47 in her purse, money she'd been saving for her daughter's medicine. Money she couldn't afford to spend. She looked at the man again, at the way his hands trembled, at the cut above his eyebrow that was still bleeding. "One moment," she said. What Sarah didn't know as she walked toward the kitchen was that this single decision, this one act of kindness on a rainy Tuesday night, would change everything. Not just for her, but for hundreds of people she'd never met. Because sometimes, the universe doesn't just reward kindness. Sometimes, it multiplies it beyond imagination. Sarah Martinez had learned about survival the hard way. At 32, she was a single mother working double shifts at Rosie's Diner in downtown Portland, trying to make ends meet while raising her 7-year-old daughter Emma, who had been diagnosed with type 1 diabetes 2 years earlier. The medical bills were crushing. Insurance covered some of it, but the co-pays, the insulin, the continuous glucose monitor supplies, it all added up to a mountain of debt that grew higher each month. Sarah had sold her car, moved to a smaller apartment, and picked up every extra shift available. Still, it wasn't enough. But she never complained. Not to Emma, not to her co-workers, not to anyone. She'd smile through the exhaustion, dance with her daughter in their tiny kitchen, and find joy in the small things. Emma's laughter, the first sip of morning coffee, the elderly regulars who left generous tips. Sarah believed in kindness, even when life wasn't kind to her. Her mother had taught her that, before the cancer took her 5 years ago. "We rise by lifting others," her mother used to say. It was a philosophy that had guided Sarah through the darkest times. Tonight was supposed to be ordinary. Another shift, another handful of tips to add to the jar marked Emma's medicine that sat on her kitchen counter. She had no way of knowing that the soggy stranger shivering in booth 7 was about to become the most important person she'd never heard of. His name was Marcus Chen, though Sarah wouldn't learn that until later. And while he sat there, looking defeated and broken, he was actually one of the most successful tech entrepreneurs in the world, a billionaire who had just lost everything that mattered. Or so he thought. Sarah emerged from the kitchen carrying a large bowl of chicken soup, steam rising from it in gentle wisps. She'd added extra crackers and a grilled cheese sandwich she'd made with her own employee meal voucher. "Here," she said gently, setting it down in front of the stranger. "On the house." Marcus Chen stared at the bowl as if it were a foreign object. When was the last time someone had simply given him something without wanting anything in return? Without knowing who he was? Without an agenda? "I can't pay you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah smiled, a genuine smile that reached her tired eyes. "I didn't ask you to. You're cold, you're hurt, and everyone deserves a hot meal. Eat." She turned to grab the first aid kit from behind the counter, missing the way Marcus's eyes suddenly glistened with unshed tears. He picked up the spoon with trembling hands and took a bite. The soup was simple, probably from a can, but in that moment, it tasted like hope. Sarah returned with antiseptic and bandages. "May I?" she asked, gesturing to the cut above his eyebrow. Marcus nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. As Sarah gently cleaned his wound, he studied her face. She couldn't have been much older than 30, but her eyes carried the weight of someone who'd lived through hardship. There were dark circles under them, suggesting sleepless nights, but also laugh lines that spoke of choosing joy despite everything. "What happened to you?" Sarah asked softly as she applied the bandage. Marcus hesitated. How could he explain? That he'd walked out of the biggest business meeting of his life after discovering his CFO and supposed best friend had been embezzling millions? That he'd left his security detail behind and just walked in the rain, needing to feel something real? That he'd deliberately gone into a rough neighborhood, almost hoping something would happen, and it did? I made some bad choices about who to trust, he finally said. It was the truth, just not all of it. Sarah nodded knowingly. I understand that. My ex-husband taught me the same lesson. She finished with a bandage and stepped back. But here's what I learned. The betrayal of one person doesn't mean everyone will betray you. There's still good in the world. You really believe that? Marcus asked, searching her face. I have to, Sarah said simply. I have a daughter who depends on me believing the world can be better than it is. Marcus ate his soup slowly, savoring each spoonful. Through the window, he could see his reflection, disheveled, wounded, stripped of all the trappings that usually defined him. No entourage, no power suit doing its job, no one knowing his net worth or his last successful startup exit. He was just a man eating soup that a kind stranger had bought him. What's your name? He asked. Sarah. Sarah Martinez. I'm Marcus. He paused, then added, just Marcus. Well, just Marcus, Sarah said with a small smile. You're welcome to stay until the rain lets up. Can I call someone for you? Family. Friends. Marcus thought about his phone, now in the possession of the three men who'd mugged him 6 blocks away. He thought about his penthouse apartment, his fleet of cars, his assistant who was probably losing her mind trying to locate him. He thought about the empire he'd built that suddenly felt hollow and meaningless. No, he said quietly. There's no one to call. Sarah's heart ached for him. She recognized that loneliness. She felt it herself some nights, after Emma had gone to bed, when the silence of their apartment pressed in on her. Well then, let me get you some coffee. You still look half frozen. As Sarah moved behind the counter to pour coffee, the diner's cook, Tommy, poked his head out from the kitchen. He'd been watching the interaction with interest. That guy doesn't have any money, Sarah, Tommy whispered. Why'd you use your meal voucher? Sarah shrugged. Because he needed it more than I do. Tommy shook his head, but he was smiling. You got too big a heart, Martinez. One of these days it's gonna get you in trouble. Maybe, Sarah replied, pouring coffee into a clean mug. Or maybe it'll get me somewhere better. She brought the coffee to Marcus, who accepted it gratefully. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, Sarah cleaning nearby tables while Marcus slowly warmed up. Outside, the rain continued its relentless assault on the city. How much do I owe you? Marcus finally asked, knowing he couldn't pay but needing to acknowledge the debt. Sarah calculated quickly in her head. The soup, sandwich, coffee, probably about $15 retail. But she'd used her employee voucher, so technically it hadn't cost her money, just her own dinner. Don't worry about it, she said. No, really. I want to pay you back. When I get back on my feet. Sarah looked at him, this broken man in an expensive suit, promising to repay her for a bowl of soup. She didn't believe she'd ever see him again, but that wasn't why she'd helped him. Tell you what, she said. When you get back on your feet, pay it forward. Buy someone else a meal when they need it. That's payment enough. Marcus studied her for a long moment, memorizing her face, the kindness in her eyes, the name tag pinned to her uniform. Sarah, 4 years. I will, he promised, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. I promise you I will. At 10:15 p.m., the rain finally eased to a drizzle. Marcus stood to leave, looking stronger than when he'd arrived but still somewhat lost. Thank you, Sarah, he said. You have no idea what this meant to me. Take care of yourself, Marcus, Sarah replied warmly. And remember, tomorrow's another day. Things can always get better. Marcus nodded and walked out into the night. Sarah watched him go, sending up a silent prayer for his safety, then turned to finish closing the diner. She'd be home by 11, check on Emma, count her tips, probably about $40 tonight, and add them to the medicine jar. It was just another Tuesday night. Or so she thought. Wednesday morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having washed the city clean. Sarah dropped Emma off at school, kissing her daughter's forehead and promising they'd have movie night on Friday if she could swap shifts. "Love you, Mama," Emma said, hugging her tight. "Love you more, baby girl," Sarah replied, watching as Emma ran to join her friends. The morning shift at Rosie's was typically slow, mostly regulars grabbing breakfast before work. Sarah moved through her routine on autopilot: coffee for Mr. Henderson, who always sat at the counter, eggs over easy for Mrs. Park, who came in every Wednesday after her doctor's appointment, pancakes for the construction crew in booth 3. At 10:47 a.m., the door chimed. Sarah looked up from refilling coffee and froze. Marcus stood in the doorway, but he was transformed. Gone was the bedraggled, desperate man from last night. In his place stood someone who radiated power and confidence. His suit was immaculate, a different one, navy blue and clearly expensive. His hair was styled, the cut above his eyebrow now just a thin line covered with a smaller bandage. Behind him stood two people, a professional-looking woman with a tablet and a large man who was obviously security. But it was Marcus's smile that caught Sarah's attention, warm and genuine, directed right at her. "Sarah," he said, walking toward her. The diner went quiet. Mr. Henderson stopped mid-sip. Tommy poked his head out from the kitchen. Even the construction workers paused their conversation. "Marcus," Sarah said uncertainly. What are you doing here?" "I came to pay my debt," he said simply. "I told you, you don't owe me anything." "Please," Marcus interrupted gently. "Let me do this. You helped me when you had no reason to, when you probably couldn't afford to. You treated me like a human being when I'd forgotten what that felt like. So please, let me say thank you properly." Sarah opened her mouth to protest, but something in his eyes stopped her. This was important to him, she realized. This mattered. "Okay," she said softly. Marcus gestured to the woman with the tablet, who stepped forward with a warm smile. "Sarah Martinez, this is Jennifer Wu, my personal attorney." Jennifer extended her hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Ms. Martinez. Mr. Chen has told me about your extraordinary kindness." Sarah shook her hand, completely confused. "I don't understand. It was just soup." "It was never just soup," Marcus said quietly. Then, louder, "Everyone, could I have your attention, please?" The handful of people in the diner turned to look at him. Marcus's presence commanded the room naturally. "Last night, I was at my lowest point. I'd lost my faith in humanity, in trust, in the basic goodness of people. I was robbed, hurt, and alone. And this woman," he gestured to Sarah, "without knowing anything about me, gave me food, cared for my wounds, and reminded me that kindness still exists in the world." Sarah felt her cheeks burning. "Marcus, really, it's not necessary." "Let me finish," he said with a gentle smile. "Sarah, I haven't been entirely honest with you. My full name is Marcus Chen. I'm the founder and CEO of Chen Technologies." Sarah blinked. Even she, who barely had time to follow the news, had heard of Chen Technologies. They'd revolutionized cloud computing and artificial intelligence. Marcus Chen was a billionaire, featured on magazine covers, one of the most successful entrepreneurs of his generation. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Last night, you spent your own meal voucher on me. You gave from what little you had. Jennifer, if you would." Jennifer tapped her tablet and looked at Sarah. "Ms. Martinez, Mr. Chen would like to do several things. First, we've paid off your apartment lease for the next 10 years. Second, we've established a medical trust fund for your daughter Emma that will cover all her medical expenses, insulin, equipment, doctor visits, everything, for the rest of her life." Sarah's knees went weak. She grabbed the counter for support. "What? No, I can't. That's too much." "We're not done," Marcus said softly. "We've also deposited $1 million into a bank account in your name. Half is for you to use as you wish. The other half is designated for Emma's education, any school she wants to attend, all expenses paid." Tears streamed down Sarah's face. "Marcus, I can't accept this. It's too much. I just bought you soup." "You gave me back my faith in humanity," Marcus said, his own eyes glistening. "You can't put a price on that. But there's one more thing." He walked to the door and opened it. Sarah, along with everyone else in the diner, craned their necks to look outside. Parked on the street was a sleek private jet shuttle van, and beyond it, visible at the nearby airfield, sat a gleaming white Gulfstream jet. "I have a proposition for you," Marcus said, returning to stand in front of Sarah. "I'm launching a new foundation, the Pay It Forward Foundation. Its mission is to identify and support people who show extraordinary kindness and to multiply their impact. I want you to be our first director." "Director?" Sarah repeated, her mind reeling. "The job comes with a salary of $200,000 a year, full benefits, and flexible hours so you can still be there for Emma. Your job would be to find other people like yourself, people who give when they have nothing, who choose kindness when the world has given them every reason not to, and help them. Grant money, resources, support, whatever they need." I'm not qualified. I'm just a waitress," Sarah stammered. "You're exactly qualified," Marcus said firmly. "You have the only qualification that matters. You understand what it means to struggle, and you still choose to lift others up. That's what this foundation needs." "That's what I need." Tommy emerged fully from the kitchen, tears running down his weathered face. "Sarah, you gotta do this. You gotta." Mr. Henderson was nodding vigorously. Mrs. Park was openly crying. "But Emma, my daughter," Sarah said weakly. "There's a top-rated school 3 blocks from the Foundation's office," Jennifer interjected. "We've already secured her a spot, if you want it. And we'll provide childcare support for any time you need it." Sarah looked around the diner, at the cracked vinyl booths, the flickering fluorescent lights, the counter she'd wiped down thousands of times. This place had been her life for 4 years. It represented survival, struggle, and small moments of connection with people who'd become like family. But it also represented limitation. Here, she could survive, but she couldn't thrive. She couldn't give Emma everything she deserved. She couldn't make the kind of difference she'd always dreamed of making. She looked at Marcus, really looked at him. Behind the expensive suit and the powerful presence, she could still see the broken man from last night, the one who'd needed kindness as desperately as he'd needed the soup. "Why me?" she asked quietly. "Because you didn't help me to get something in return," Marcus said. "You helped me because it was the right thing to do. In a world where everyone wants something, you wanted nothing but to ease another person's suffering. That's rare, Sarah. That's precious. And that's exactly what the world needs more of." Sarah closed her eyes, overwhelmed. She thought about Emma, about giving her daughter a life without constant worry about medical bills. She thought about her mother's words, "We rise by lifting others." She thought about all the people she could help if she had real resources behind her kindness. She opened her eyes and met Marcus's gaze. "Okay," she whispered. Then, stronger, "Yes, I'll do it." The diner erupted in applause. 2 weeks later, Sarah stood in her new office on the 20th floor of the Chen Technologies building, looking out at the city that had been her home for her entire life. It looked different from up here, full of possibility instead of just struggle. "Mom, look how fast the computer is." Emma's voice came from the small adjoining room that Marcus had insisted be set up as a homework space. Emma could come here after school, do her homework, and be near her mother. She had her own desk, a mini-fridge stocked with her preferred snacks, and a medical station with all her diabetes supplies. Sarah smiled, watching her daughter through the glass partition. The past 2 weeks had been a whirlwind. She'd given her notice at Rosie's, though Marcus had insisted on making a substantial donation to the diner and had given Tommy a raise to become manager. She'd moved to a new apartment, bigger and brighter, in a safer neighborhood with better schools. She'd met with lawyers, accountants, and foundation advisors. But most importantly, she'd started learning about the people she was going to help. Jennifer walked in, carrying a stack of folders. "Ready for your first review meeting?" "As ready as I'll ever be," Sarah said, settling into her chair. It was leather, expensive, and still felt surreal. Sometimes she expected to wake up and find herself back in her old apartment, this entire experience just a dream. Jennifer spread out the folders. "These are the first 10 candidates for foundation support. Marcus wanted you to have final say on all decisions." Sarah opened the first folder. Inside was a photo of a middle-aged man named David Torres, a high school janitor who'd been using his own salary to buy food for students who couldn't afford lunch. He'd gone into debt doing it, but he couldn't stand seeing kids go hungry. Him, Sarah said immediately. We help him pay off his debt, set up a proper meal fund for his school, and give him a grant to expand to other schools in the district. Jennifer smiled and made notes. Marcus said you'd have good instincts. Next. The second folder showed a young woman named Keisha Williams, a nurse who'd been running an unofficial free clinic out of her basement for uninsured patients. She'd been cited by the city and was facing fines she couldn't pay. We help her too, Sarah said. But let's do more than pay the fines. Let's help her set up a legitimate community health clinic. Work with the city to make it legal and sustainable. They went through folder after folder. A teacher buying school supplies with her own money. A firefighter who'd started a program teaching kids fire safety but couldn't afford to expand. A retired veteran who'd been housing homeless veterans in his own home. Each story broke Sarah's heart and rebuilt it stronger. These were her people, people who gave when they had nothing, who saw need and responded, consequences be damned. You're a natural at this, Jennifer said as they finished the last folder. I understand them, Sarah said simply. I've been them. There was a knock on the door. Marcus entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee. Thought you might need this, he said, handing one to Sarah. Thank you, she said, accepting it gratefully. Marcus, these people, their stories are incredible. I know, he said, settling into a chair across from her desk. That's why this foundation matters. There are thousands of people like them, like you, out there, doing extraordinary things with nothing. Imagine what they could do with something. Sarah took a sip of coffee, good coffee, not the bitter brew from the diner's ancient machine, and studied Marcus. Over the past 2 weeks, she'd learned more about him. About the betrayal that had sent him walking in the rain. About his decision to restructure his entire company, to refocus on making a positive impact rather than just making money. About his own childhood, growing up poor, never forgetting what it felt like to be hungry. Can I ask you something? Sarah said. Anything. Why did you really walk into that neighborhood that night? You could have called your security. Called a car. But you walked into one of the most dangerous parts of the city. Why? Marcus was quiet for a moment, staring into his coffee cup. Honestly, part of me wanted to see if the world was as cold as I'd started believing it was. If people were really only out for themselves. I think part of me was hoping someone would prove me wrong. And I did, Sarah said softly. You did more than that. You reminded me what I'd been working for in the first place. When I started my company, it wasn't about the money. It was about innovation, about making things better. Somewhere along the way, I forgot that. I got surrounded by people who only cared about profit margins and stock prices. I lost sight of the human element. He looked up at her, his expression earnest. You gave me that back, Sarah. And now, through this foundation, I get to give it to others. We get to give it to others. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes again. She'd been crying a lot lately. Happy tears, grateful tears, overwhelmed tears. I still can't believe this is real sometimes. It's real, Marcus assured her. And it's just the beginning. I want this foundation to grow. I want it to become a model for others. I want to prove that kindness isn't weakness, it's strength. That generosity isn't foolishness, it's wisdom. Emma appeared in the doorway, her continuous glucose monitor beeping. Mom, my blood sugar's a little high. Can I have insulin? Of course, baby, Sarah said, starting to stand, but Emma waved her off. I can do it myself. I just wanted to tell you. Emma administered her insulin with practiced ease, something she'd become independent with over the past year. She gave Marcus a shy wave. Hi, Mr. Chen. Hi, Emma. How's the new school? Emma's face lit up. It's amazing. They have an actual library with so many books, and a science lab, and the teacher said I'm really good at math. That's wonderful, Marcus said warmly. You know, when you're older, if you're interested in technology, I'd be happy to set up some internships for you at the company. Really? Emma's eyes went wide. That would be so cool. After Emma returned to her homework, Marcus turned back to Sarah. "She's a great kid. You've done an amazing job with her." "I've done my best," Sarah said. "But now, because of you, I can do even better. I can give her opportunities one never dreamed possible." "You gave me soup, Sarah. I'm giving you soup back, just different ingredients. Resources, opportunities, support, it's all just different forms of nourishment." Sarah laughed. "That's a very philosophical way to look at it." "I've had time to think," Marcus said with a grin. "That night in your diner, eating that soup, was the first time in months I'd actually slowed down enough to think about what really mattered. You gave me space to be human again." Jennifer poked her head back in. "Sorry to interrupt, but Sarah, you have a call from Keisha Williams. She just heard about the Foundation's decision and wants to thank you personally." Sarah picked up the phone, and for the next 10 minutes, she listened to Keisha's tearful gratitude. The young nurse had been about to give up, to close her basement clinic and let down all the people who depended on her. Now, she could not only continue but expand her services. When Sarah hung up, she was crying again. "This," she said to Marcus, gesturing at the phone. "This is why I said yes." Hearing the relief in her voice, knowing we're going to help her help others, it's the best feeling in the world. "Welcome to Purpose," Marcus said quietly. "It beats profit every time." Speaking of which, Jennifer interjected, "We have the gala next month to officially launch the foundation. Sarah, you'll need to give a speech." Sarah's eyes widened. "A speech? In front of people?" "In front of about 500 people," Jennifer said cheerfully. "Donors, media, politicians. It's going to be a big event." Sarah looked panicked, but Marcus laughed. "Don't worry. We'll help you prepare. And just remember, you're not a waitress asking for help. You're a director of a major foundation offering people a chance to be part of something meaningful. You're giving them an opportunity to find their own humanity." Sarah took a deep breath. "Okay. I can do this. For the people we're going to help, I can do anything." "That's the spirit," Marcus said. "Now, let's talk about expansion plans." 3 months later, the Pay It Forward Foundation had become a phenomenon. What started as Marcus's personal mission had captured the public's imagination. Stories of the people the foundation helped went viral on social media. News outlets ran features about ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Other wealthy individuals and corporations had started contributing to the foundation, wanting to be part of the movement. Sarah stood backstage at the foundation's 3rd monthly gala, adjusting her dress, a simple but elegant navy number that Jennifer had helped her pick out. She'd gotten better at these events, though she still felt most comfortable in casual clothes. But she'd learned that the fancy galas weren't really about her, they were about attracting the resources needed to help more people. "5 minutes, Ms. Martinez," a staff member said. Emma, dressed in a beautiful green dress, hugged her mother's waist. At these events, Emma had become something of a mascot, a reminder that the foundation's work had real, tangible impacts on real families. "You're going to be great, Mom," Emma said with the confidence of an 8-year-old who believed her mother could do anything. "Thanks, baby girl," Sarah said, kissing the top of her daughter's head. Marcus appeared, looking dashing in a tailored tuxedo. "Ready as I'll ever be," Sarah replied. "Who's tonight's honored guest?" "You'll see," Marcus said with a mysterious smile. "I think you'll be pleased." They walked onto the stage together to thunderous applause. The ballroom was packed with 500 of the city's most influential people, each paying $10,000 a plate for the privilege of supporting the foundation. Every dollar raised would go directly to helping people like David Torres, Keisha Williams, and dozens of others whose lives had been transformed over the past 3 months. Sarah approached the microphone, Emma standing beside her, Marcus just behind them. She'd learned to steady her nerves by focusing on why she was doing this. "Good evening," she began, her voice stronger than it had been at her first gala. 3 months ago, I was working double shifts at a diner, worried about how I was going to afford my daughter's medicine. I was one unexpected expense away from financial disaster, like millions of Americans. But I was also someone who believed in kindness, even when life wasn't particularly kind to me. She paused, looking at the sea of faces. One rainy night, a stranger came into my diner. He had nothing, his wallet had been stolen, he was hurt, and he was cold. I bought him soup with my own meal voucher. It cost me about $15 and my dinner that night. I didn't expect anything in return. I certainly didn't expect that stranger to be Marcus Chen, and I definitely didn't expect to be standing here today." The audience chuckled appreciatively. "But here's what I've learned over the past 3 months. That bowl of soup wasn't just about feeding one hungry person. It was about something bigger. It was about choosing to see humanity in a moment when it would have been easier to look away. And that choice, that small act of kindness, created ripples." She clicked a button on the remote in her hand, and the screen behind her lit up with images. This is David Torres. He's a school janitor who was buying lunch for hungry students with his own money. The foundation paid off his $47,000 debt and established a permanent meal fund at his school. Now, no student goes hungry, and David doesn't have to choose between helping kids and feeding his own family. Another click. This is Keisha Williams. She was running an illegal free clinic out of her basement because she couldn't stand watching people suffer without medical care. The foundation helped her establish a legitimate community health center. She now serves over 300 patients a month who otherwise would have no access to health care. Image after image appeared: teachers, firefighters, nurses, volunteers, ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Each one had been identified, supported, and empowered by the foundation. These people didn't help others because they expected recognition or reward, Sarah continued, her voice growing passionate. They helped because it was the right thing to do. And that's what this foundation celebrates and supports: the inherent goodness in humanity. The people who give when they have nothing. The people who see suffering and respond. The people who make the world better one small act at a time. She looked at Marcus. Marcus Chen gave me an incredible gift when he started this foundation. But he gave the world an even greater gift: proof that kindness matters. That it's noticed. That it can change everything. The audience erupted in applause. Marcus stepped forward, placing a hand on Sarah's shoulder. "Sarah's being modest," he said into his own microphone. "She's the heart of this foundation. Every decision, every person we help, every program we launch, it goes through her. And she approaches each one with the same compassion she showed me that night in the diner." He clicked to a new slide. "Tonight, we have a special announcement. The Pay It Forward Foundation is expanding nationally. We're opening branches in 10 major cities across the country, each one directed by someone like Sarah. Someone who understands struggle, who embodies kindness, and who has the vision to identify and support everyday heroes." The audience applauded again, but Marcus raised his hand. "And we have one more surprise. Sarah, would you please turn around?" Confused, Sarah turned to face the back of the stage. The curtain rose, revealing a group of about 50 people standing there. Sarah's hands flew to her mouth. There was Tommy from Rosie's Diner, grinning from ear to ear. Mr. Henderson and Mrs. Park, her regular customers. The construction workers who'd been in the diner that Wednesday morning. And behind them, David Torres, Keisha Williams, and every single person the foundation had helped over the past 3 months. "These are the people whose lives you've touched," Marcus said softly. "They wanted to be here to thank you." One by one, they came forward. Tommy hugged her, whispering, "I told you that big heart would get you somewhere good." Mr. Henderson handed her a card signed by all the diner's regulars. David Torres thanked her for saving his life and his purpose. Keisha Williams introduced her to 3 of her patients who'd received life-saving care at the new clinic. Sarah was openly crying now, and Emma was holding her hand tightly, beaming with pride at her mother. Finally, Marcus stepped forward again. "When Sarah bought me that soup, she changed my life. But through this foundation, she's changed hundreds of lives. And this is just the beginning. In 5 years, I want this foundation to have helped 10,000 people. In 10 years, 100,000. Because that's what happens when you multiply kindness, it grows exponentially." He looked at Sarah. "You told me that night to pay it forward. I want you to know, I take that seriously. Every day, I wake up and ask myself, how can I be more like Sarah Martinez? How can I see people the way she does? How can I give the way she gives?" The audience rose in a standing ovation. Sarah stood there, surrounded by the people she'd helped, holding her daughter's hand, with Marcus beside her, and she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not just hope, but certainty. Certainty that kindness mattered. That one person could make a difference. That the world, despite all its problems, still had more good in it than bad. That night, as she tucked Emma into bed in their new apartment, Emma looked up at her with serious eyes. "Mom, when I grow up, I want to be like you." "What do you mean, sweetie?" "I want to help people the way you do. I want to make them feel better." Sarah's heart swelled. "You can be anything you want to be, baby girl. But if you choose to help others, you'll never be poor, not in the ways that really matter." After Emma fell asleep, Sarah stood at her window, looking out at the city lights. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Thank you for saying yes. You're changing the world." She smiled, thinking back to that rainy Tuesday night that seemed like a lifetime ago. She'd given a stranger soup, expecting nothing in return. Instead, she'd received everything. But more importantly, she'd learned that the returns on kindness were infinite. They just didn't always come in the form you expected. 1 year after that fateful rainy night, Sarah stood at the grand opening of the Foundation's 10th branch, this one in her hometown. Emma stood beside her, healthy and thriving, already talking about starting her own charity someday. Marcus had taught her that wealth wasn't just about money, it was about impact, purpose, and the legacy you leave behind. The foundation had helped over 5,000 people in its first year, and the number was growing daily. But what mattered most to Sarah wasn't the numbers or the accolades. It was the letters she received, from single mothers who could finally afford their children's medicine, from teachers who could now properly stock their classrooms, from veterans who'd found housing, from nurses who could continue their calling. Each letter proved what her mother had told her: we rise by lifting others. That bowl of soup had cost Sarah $15 and her own dinner. In return, she'd received a purpose that fed her soul in ways she'd never imagined possible. Sometimes, the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest changes. Sometimes, a stranger is really an angel in disguise. And sometimes, all it takes is a bowl of soup to change the world. The end.